All right, here we have our element list sheet that we got basically, I think, on the first day of school, and you had started filling in the element names. So your paper should have all the element names on it, and there should not be anything else on your paper as of now. Element names on both sides. Okay, so now we're going to add some other things to this because we're going to get to the rest of the paper and figure out what that means and how you find all those numbers. So let's look at an example. Here's aluminum. So if you look at a periodic table, you're going to see a whole number. That's called the atomic number. And you're going to see a decimal number. That decimal number is called the atomic mass. And you find the atomic mass by adding the number of protons and the number of neutrons together. And that is the sum. Usually we're going to use what's called the mass number, which is going to be the rounded version of this number. So you need to get out your rounding skills, your math rounding skills, and round that to the nearest whole number. Remember how we do that is if we're rounding to the nearest whole number, then we look at the tenths place where the 9 is. And if it's 5 or more, then we raise this to, this would be 27. If this is 4 or less, then we would let this rest at 26 and not do anything to it. So since this is a 9, would be 5 or more. We're going to raise this to the next number, which would be 27. And that's how we got the mass number of 27 there. All right. So down here, the first thing I want you to do is to copy all of this information down that you see here. And then we'll work on the stuff down here. So go ahead and pause this video and fill in the stuff that you see up here, and then you can unpause it when you're ready for the next part. Okay, if you're ready for the next part, then what this stuff is up here, so look at your paper and look at what I'm talking about. So protons have a mass of 1 AMU. AMU is called atomic mass unit, and all protons have a mass of about 1 AMU. AMU is kind of like grams, but protons, neutrons, electrons are so small that they have their own special label. So that an AMU would be way smaller than a gram. Electrons have a mass of 0 AMU, and they are negatively charged, so that's why we have a negative there. Protons are positively charged. I don't remember if I said that or not, so that's why we have a positive over there. So the atomic number is the whole number. That's what was up there. And then we've got protons. How do we find it? We find it because it's the atomic number. And the location, protons are in the nucleus of an atom. Then we've got electrons over here. They have an atomic mass unit of 0. Electrons are so much smaller than a proton that they just round their mass to 0 and say that they basically, don't exist, I guess, even though they do exist, but you know what I'm saying. How to find the number of electrons. The number of electrons is always going to be the same as the protons for most atoms. You'll see when that changes later on in our chemistry course. But right now, just remember that they're the same as the protons. And that would be the same as the atomic number. And electrons are located in, there's various names for it. Electron shells, that's what the little E minus represents, is like a little symbol for electrons. So they're in electron shells. Some people will call them orbitals. Some people will call them an electron cloud. You might call them energy levels. But regardless of what they call them, they're all outside of the nucleus. And so that's why we wrote that there. All right. So for example, down here, if I'm dealing with aluminum, which was the one we focused on, if I've got 13 as my atomic number, then I've got 13 protons and 13 electrons. Go ahead and pause the video and go through each of these elements over here and on the back side, and go ahead and just practice what's the atomic number, how many protons, how many electrons. Go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then come back on when you're ready for the other columns over here. Okay, now you're back and you're ready for these last 2 columns. You've already done these 3 columns, and so now we're over here. So what this is the atomic mass. Remember, we talked about the atomic mass. That's that decimal number there. And then I wrote here the mass of the atom is what that is. The rounded version is called the mass number. So I just want you to write the mass numbers here. So you're going to use your periodic table, and you're going to look to see what is the atomic mass of each of these elements, and you're going to round that decimal that you see for each element to the nearest whole number. Remember, in the tens place, if it's 5 or more, then you'll raise the whole number to the next number. If it's less than 5, then you're just going to leave the whole number as it is and chop off everything after the decimal point. And then over here, we have our neutrons. Neutrons have a mass of 1 AMU, just like protons did. They are neutral, which means they don't have a charge, so we usually represent that with a little like 0. How do we find the number of neutrons? We take the mass number minus the number of protons, and the neutrons are always located in the nucleus, like the protons. Notice they're both in the nucleus. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is take a look at aluminum, right? We already did those 3 columns. Now, if we look at the atomic mass, we have that number. Remember, we rounded it to the whole number to be the mass number, and that's the number I have there now. Then we're going to use our calculator if you need to, and you're going to take the mass number, that's this number, and you're going to subtract the number of protons. So for aluminum, I would take the mass number of 27, subtract the number of protons, 13, and I'm going to get 14. And then you could check your work by saying, does the number of neutrons plus the number of protons, does that equal the mass number? Because remember, our entire atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons, and that's how we get that. So that should work as well if you do that mathematically. All right, so that's going to be the end of the video, and I want you to go ahead and work on these 2 columns on the front and the back, practicing rounding the atomic mass to the nearest whole number, and then calculating the number of neutrons, and then you will be done. Bye.